This is a dimension. This would be one aspect of a church's entire 12-month or 24-month ministry plan. But that's what it looks like to communicate. And that's a little bit different than the typical announcement that comes from the platform on Sunday morning, right? You can imagine the difference that something like this makes. It doesn't mean that we all have to have great videos. It means that we have to make it real for people, and we have to be able to connect them to what is the challenge and opportunity, why are we uniquely responsible for responding to it, what can we do about it, more importantly, what can I, as the person sitting in the pew, do about it, and how can I accomplish that through you, this particular church? And when you answer those questions and those things are in alignment, you've given me everything I need to say yes. Very important. So the more we're silent about money, the more other people's budgets will be funded. Right? There's a lot of great organizations doing great things. They are not competitors in the sense that we should win and they shouldn't. This isn't a zero-sum game. God's world is unlimited. But when it comes to the fact that if we have competitive voices and the church is silent, then money God intended to move through the people of our pews into the offering plates and into the communities we serve will be diverted elsewhere. Not because they didn't want to, but because we didn't ask. And because we didn't ask in a compelling way that connected the responsibility and the opportunity and the call to action. So, this has hopefully been this first part of this section has been a time for you to kind of begin to put some flesh and bone on what you might have been feeling intuitively about what's happening and what's changing and what those shifts look like. And what I want to do is focus the next part of our conversation around what are some elements of a game-changing plan, if you will. But before we do that, I want to invite any questions about that first part. Anything that you wanted to revisit?
We find that we don't have a problem when we present the story of building these nursing schools that support those kinds of things. Where we do ourselves with this service is we don't talk enough about why it's important to keep the lights on and the building,
That's right.
To enable us to do all those other things. And so I hope we'll connect sort of the operational with the mission work.
Absolutely. My goodness. And you know what? I don't think that's a challenge that the person in the pew is placed on the person on the platform. I think it's a challenge that we've created ourselves. Because we've spent so much time talking about the mission work that we fail to explain how that mission work gets done, right? I mean, World Vision does a lot of fantastic things, but somebody has to be there to write the letter, to print the letter, to mail the letter, and for it to get out and for it to be able to do. There has to be infrastructure. This idea that organizations or nonprofits exist should be able to exist without infrastructure is foolish. So it just doesn't work. There have been a million different people that have come up with a number of different ideas about how to do that, and it just doesn't work. This is why I love talking about church planners and then talking to them about 5 years later. Because when you first talk to them, they're like, oh, we don't need to do this, and we don't need that, and we can grow a church without a building, and then they get to a certain point, and they need a place to put the kids and the babies, and they need a safe place in order to not have to work around somebody else's schedule to have community events, and all of a sudden having a building becomes important to them, and they kind of shift, right? It's just as we grow up, it's like, at 16, my parents didn't know anything. By 21, they got a lot smarter. And so it's as we grow, we have to learn and understand that there are operations that are part of it. And I love this phrase, and I use this all the time, and it is like the phrase that I want all of you to use when you're talking about this, if you're struggling to do this. Talk about building ministry capacity. The fact of the matter is, if we don't have leaders to lead, we don't have buildings in order to organize folks, we don't have materials in order to teach them, if we can't have a way to collect people and dollars and resources and distribute them effectively, then we will not be good stewards no matter how much money that we have. It becomes a self-defeating prophecy if we think we can run church without having operations. So what we have to do is we have to tell the whole story. But we only want to tell part of the story because that part of the story feels, quite frankly, and I hope this doesn't offend anybody, it just feels sexier than paying the light bill. And we'd rather focus on that because we think that that's what people want to hear. The fact of the matter is people are not opposed to that. People are opposed to that if that's the end game. Not if because we have that infrastructure, we can do this. And that's how we have to cast it.
I'm wrestling with the observation that there's a silence, but when we talk about money, giving, and so forth, people will say, all you ever do is talk about money. So what's going on in our churches where, and then how do we communicate such that we overcome that sort of pushback that all you ever do is talk about money?
Let me tell you a little secret. And I can tell you this is a secret because I look at the giving information of churches all across the country. The people who are the most vocal about who say that are also the people who don't give anything. I guarantee it. I have never met a generous person that doesn't say, Pastor, just please don't talk about money one more time. They want to. Why? Because they're experiencing the joy of giving, and they want other people to join in what's happening. So we have this thing where we tend to, and what's also dangerous, and we have to watch this in our churches, and there's a whole big hole I could fall in here, and I don't want you to shut me down because I'm going to go there. Okay? Everyone's got a different threshold when it comes to discretion around what you should know about what people give. Okay? We're not going to go there because that's a whole different slice of pie. But people who don't give but want you to think they do are closer to you and louder in your ear than you think they are. So I'm just telling you, be careful who you listen to from your lay leaders. Be careful about your staff. I can't tell you the number of times that I've gone in and done an assessment for churches, and I don't tell the names of the people, and I don't tell the names of the staff members, but I can look and I can tell a church that is struggling with finances will have staff that isn't giving, and will also have key lay leaders in key lay volunteer positions that aren't giving. And what do? We tend to think that the people who are closest to us are all in. But that's not always true. So, I would encourage you, obviously, you don't go, what was your name again? Let me go check your giving record. No, that's certainly not the response I give. But I think we have to remember that sometimes when people give us that feedback, it's because we're taking them to a place that they don't want to go. It's no different than somebody pushing back on, well, Pastor, should I really pray? Do I really need to read the Bible? Do I really need to come to church? Do I really need to do this? Can't I just become a member and just send you some money when I got a little extra? And can't that just be enough, right? Like what's the base minimum that I can do to squeeze my way into heaven? That kind of thing. And that's we have to take people on their journey, but we also have to be cognizant. I think any kind of time we get feedback like that, we should take it honestly and we should take it seriously. But we should also understand that sometimes that comes from people who aren't all in. And it also means that sometimes that means we need to take people along a journey that they're not ready to go. So that's some advice. I don't know what, it's always interesting, the pastors who are the most adamant to me that tell me that that's true. Not only are the other things that we talked about, but every time they do talk about giving goes through the roof. I tell one pastor, every time you talk about money, every time you do a sermon on money, as uncomfortable as you are, and he would just be in knots for the week, like having cold sweats, all this kind of stuff. Every single Sunday, they were up about an average of $100,000. I said, Pastor, I said, none of your staff members are bright enough to tell you this, but you've lost the right to be uncomfortable talking about money. This church needs you to talk about that. So it is interesting sometimes, and I think it also comes from our projection of our own insecurities about the conversation. It's the discrepancy of what I talk about in Church Game Matters between the view from the pew and the view from the pulpit. That sometimes we project onto them things that we are insecure about ourselves that they aren't necessarily insecure about. Listen, people don't have a problem talking about money with their financial planner. They don't have a problem talking about money when it comes to education. They don't have a problem talking about money when it's time for a raise at work. And then all of a sudden they get to church and it's somehow uncomfortable and unacceptable to talk about that. It goes back to just us couching within that. And I think also another thing, not to completely just park on this conversation, I think the other thing, it goes back to our understanding of stewardship as part of the spiritual formation process. We said that back over here earlier, and I think you did. We're going to talk about that tomorrow, called the Great Stewardship Conspiracy, if you will. But that in and of itself, if we have a plan, because within our churches, there are people at 4 different levels. Okay, there are people that have no context for giving whatsoever. And we have to challenge them to go there. And then there are people who have inconsistent habits about giving, and we have to get them to a place where they're giving consistently. And then there are people that are giving consistently, but they've never been challenged beyond what's comfortable. And then there are people that literally have the capacity to change their life through giving. And it doesn't always mean that those are the wealthiest people in your church. I've known people that have agreed to a certain level of income, and anything above that, they're giving away. And they might only be living on 10 or 20% of what they make. I got to spend some time with a surgeon and his wife. And of course, as you can imagine, a surgeon with a successful practice is making a considerable amount of money. They decided at one point in their lives that they were not going to live on any more than 15% of what they made. Imagine 10, 20 years of giving away that size of money. So sometimes generosity is about just changing our approach and understanding of that. So that's a long answer to your question. Any others?
You put some interesting numbers on the screen early in your presentation. I think overall charitable giving had gone up 4.6% in the same period of time. Maybe the church has maybe gone down 1.4%.
Yeah.
Getting behind those numbers might be interesting. I'm not sure what happened to church membership, for example. I mean, how much of that decline could be attributed to a decline in church membership, and maybe the age structures of the congregations changing? And is there a source of data for all this if we want to research that?
Absolutely. You know what? Unfortunately, there are not the research bodies around church giving that there are around other forms or all charitable giving. And church giving tends to be left out because in the larger charitable giving context, church giving tends to be kind of somewhat of a voodoo practice, right? You know, I mean, it's like this weird quasi thing that you can't quantify because people have this commitment to give that's beyond a rational sense, depending on what part of Christianity you're part of. And so so they tend not to apply this. So Empty Tomb's done some stuff. Indiana School of Philanthropy might be a source of some other good information that's out there. But outside of those two, those are probably the two most credible. Empty Tomb. And we'll look at a book tomorrow. I believe it's tomorrow's presentation called "Passing the Plate." That talks. It has an interesting take on American Christianity's view on giving, and I think that's going to have some interesting information there for you. But I think when you dig a little bit below, what I always tell leaders, don't benchmark yourself against national trends. Benchmark yourself against yourself. If you live in a community where the average household income is $1 million, why should you be acceptable of the per capita giving of a church that includes a church in South Dakota? Right? So really what we should do is establish a baseline for our churches, our church, and then be able to benchmark and see how well are we doing, and that comes from general areas. But I think all of the factors that you described contribute to that. And so I think from a top-line perspective, I think we have to ask the question, something is changing. There's more money going toward charitable giving, and yet less and less of it is part of church giving. So that probably has to do with the fact that there may be a generation that had a general sense of commitment and obligation to give to church that is passing away. And they have, again, like my parents, who saw my grandparents give, and which my grandparents were taught, all of the things that we were talking about at that time, and my parents, they weren't taught, there was no overt conversation, they just followed the behavior. And then I come along and I just upset the apple cart because I asked the question, why? And then my parents were like, I don't know, I didn't know, I never asked why, I just did it because it wasn't a question, you didn't ask why, you just did it. And so we have this, but I think there are a number of factors that are involved. And there's some anomalies on both sides. There are smaller churches that are giving exceptionally well. There are large churches that are giving exceptionally poorly.
I think it's as many non-profit organizations as there are to give to now, coming up. It's easier to get people to give to them than it is to churches, because in churches we protect their privacy, and the non-profits we print their names in the program according to the category that they've given, and they give special titles and they have special parties for them, and they're celebrated in the church.
Yeah, we'll look at a book tomorrow that you might be interested in called The Ministry of Giving. And it really talks about the role of what I call the financial leader. I helped write this book with a few other folks that have been in the stewardship world for a while. And we have a name for every other leader in the church, right? We have children's leaders, we have youth leaders, we have song leaders, we have teaching pastors, and then when it comes to people with money, the gift of giving, we don't have a category for them, right? We take them and we ask them to lead some, summer Bible group, or we ask them to teach a Sunday school class, things that aren't necessarily in line with who they are and how they're gifted. And so I believe there's this whole section of churches that have the people that are generally financial leaders, and we're not doing anything, and we're not treating them as a group. It doesn't mean that we should have some special class for people. Okay, we're not going. I want to get into the James theological debate here around showing favoritism, but I think there's a role for people within churches who have the gift of giving, and that is a ministry in and of itself, and they have to be discipled. They have challenges just like you. I mean, think about this. We think money solves problems, right? Right? Well, most of us are taught this, right? You earn more, your problems will go away. Imagine what it's like to earn $1 million a year and try to tell your 16-year-old son that you can't buy him a Porsche. There's a lot of brokenness in people all across your congregation, no matter what is in their bank account.